Sarah Chen stood at the imposing gates of the Riverside Military Academy, her heart pounding as she clutched her identification card. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds, and she could hear the distant sound of cadets marching in formation. Today was supposed to be the most important day of her life, the day she would finally gain access to the classified military archives that held the key to her father's mysterious disappearance 20 years ago. The security guard, a stern-faced man in his 50s with graying temples, examined her ID card with suspicious eyes. His nameplate read Officer Morrison, and his withered hands turned the card over multiple times, squinting at the holographic security features. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside," Officer Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had been manning these gates for decades. "This identification appears to be fraudulent." Sarah's blood ran cold. "That's impossible," she protested, her voice barely above a whisper. "I received this directly from the Department of Defense. I have clearance level 7 authorization." Morrison shook his head firmly, comparing her ID to something on his computer screen. "The serial numbers don't match our database, and the security codes are invalid. I'm afraid I cannot allow you entry to the premises." Behind Sarah, a line of other visitors began to form, their impatient murmurs growing louder. A businessman checked his watch repeatedly, while a woman in a navy suit tapped her foot against the concrete. Sarah felt the weight of their stares as heat crept up her neck. "Please, you don't understand," Sarah pleaded, leaning closer to the bulletproof glass that separated them. "My father, Colonel James Chen, disappeared during a classified mission in 2003. I've spent 20 years trying to get access to his files. This meeting took me months to arrange." Morrison's expression softened slightly, but his resolve remained firm. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am, but regulations are regulations. Without proper identification, I cannot permit access to the facility. You'll need to contact the appropriate department and resolve this issue with your credentials." Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the ID card that had cost her thousands of dollars in legal fees and countless hours of bureaucratic battles. She had quit her job as a software engineer 6 months ago to dedicate herself full-time to uncovering the truth about her father's fate. Her savings were nearly depleted, and this was supposed to be her breakthrough moment. The military academy behind the gates stretched across hundreds of acres, its red brick buildings and manicured lawns a stark contrast to the chaos in Sarah's mind. She had dreamed of walking through those halls, but finally, accessing the classified documents that would reveal what happened to her father during Operation Desert Storm's aftermath. "Can I speak to your supervisor?" Sarah asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "There must be someone who can verify my credentials." Morrison glanced at his watch. "The duty officer won't be available until this afternoon. You're welcome to wait in the visitors area outside the main gate, but I cannot guarantee anything will change." As Sarah stepped away from the security booth, her phone buzzed with a text message from her younger brother David. "Any news yet?" "Mom's been asking all morning." She couldn't bring herself to respond. How could she tell her family that after all this time, after all the hope and preparation, she had been turned away at the very first hurdle? The visitors area consisted of a small concrete plaza with a few metal benches and a single vending machine. Sarah sat down heavily, her legs suddenly feeling weak. She pulled out a worn manila folder containing copies of every document she had managed to obtain over the years: military service records, medal citations, witness statements from her father's unit members who had survived the mission. Colonel James Chen had been a decorated officer, respected by his peers and beloved by his family. Sarah remembered him as a man who always kept his promises, who never missed her school plays or soccer games despite his demanding military schedule. The last time she saw him, she was 12 years old, and he had promised to bring her back a souvenir from his deployment. That souvenir never came, and neither did he. The official report stated that Colonel Chen had been killed in action during a reconnaissance mission, but his body was never recovered. The details were classified, and, for 20 years, Sarah had been given the runaround by various government agencies. Some officials claimed the files were destroyed, others insisted they never existed, and a few had simply refused to discuss the matter entirely. It wasn't until Sarah hired a private investigator last year that she learned her father's mission had been far more complex than anyone had admitted. The PI had uncovered evidence suggesting that Colonel Chen had been investigating potential war crimes committed by private military contractors. His final report had supposedly contained explosive revelations that could have ended careers and triggered international incidents. Sarah opened her laptop and began typing an email to her attorney, explaining the situation with her rejected identification. As she wrote, she noticed a black SUV with government plates pulling up to the main gate. Two men in dark suits emerged from the vehicle, their movements precise and purposeful. She watched as they approached Officer Morrison's booth, showing their credentials with the confidence of people accustomed to immediate compliance. Morrison's entire demeanor changed, his back straightened, and he practically leaped to attention. Within moments, the gate swung open, and the SUV disappeared into the academy grounds. Just like that, Sarah muttered to herself, feeling a fresh wave of frustration. Some people flash their badges, and doors open automatically. An elderly man sitting on the bench beside her overheard her comment. He was wearing a faded veteran's cap and had the weathered look of someone who had seen decades of military life. "First time dealing with military bureaucracy?" he asked with a knowing smile. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak without breaking down. "Name's Frank Rodriguez," the man said, extending a calloused hand. "Retired Master Sergeant. I spent 30 years navigating this system, and I can tell you that sometimes the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing." "Sarah Chen," she replied, grateful for the human connection. "I'm trying to access my father's military records. He died in service 20 years ago." Frank's expression grew serious. "Chen, that name sounds familiar. What unit was he with?" "The 82nd Airborne, then, later attached to Special Operations Command for classified missions." Frank was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah's face with intense concentration. "Colonel James Chen? The one who disappeared during that contractor investigation?" Sarah's heart nearly stopped. "You knew my father?" "Knew of him," Frank corrected. "Word travels fast in the military community, especially when something doesn't smell right. Your father was asking questions that made some very powerful people uncomfortable." Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the area code was local to the military base. "Ms. Chen?" The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. "This is Colonel Martinez from the base commander's office. We understand there's been an issue with your identification credentials." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Yes, that's correct. Officer Morrison at the gate says my ID is fraudulent, but I received it directly from the DoD. There appears to have been a miscommunication. Your credentials are valid, and we apologize for any inconvenience. However, we need to discuss some additional security measures before you can access the requested files." "What kind of security measures?" "I'm afraid that's not something we can discuss over the phone. Would you be available for a meeting this afternoon? Say, 2 o'clock? Sarah glanced at her watch. It was barely noon. "Yes, absolutely. Where should I meet you?" "We'll send a car to pick you up at the main gate at 1:45. Please bring all of your identification and any documentation related to your request." The call ended before Sarah could ask any more questions. She stared at her phone in confusion, wondering what had changed in the past hour to suddenly make her credentials valid. Frank had been listening to her side of the conversation with obvious interest. "Sounds like someone made a phone call on your behalf," he observed. "That's not how things usually work around here." "What do you mean?" "Military bureaucracy moves at the speed of molasses unless someone with stars on their shoulders decides to grease the wheels. The fact that they're sending a car to pick you up suggests this goes higher up the chain of command than you might expect." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. After 20 years of bureaucratic stonewalling, the sudden cooperation seemed almost too good to be true. She began organizing her documents, making sure she had everything the colonel had requested. As she worked, she noticed more activity around the main gate. Several military vehicles had arrived, and personnel in dress uniforms were moving with unusual urgency. Something significant was clearly happening at the base, but Sarah couldn't determine what it might be. At exactly 1:45, a pristine black sedan with government plates pulled up to the visitors area. The driver, a young soldier in crisp fatigues, stepped out and approached Sarah. "Miss Chen? I'm Private Johnson. I'm here to escort you to your meeting with Colonel Martinez." Sarah gathered her belongings and followed the soldier to the vehicle. As they passed through the main gate, she noticed Officer Morrison watching her with a puzzled expression. Clearly, he hadn't been informed about the change in her status. The drive through the academy grounds revealed a world Sarah had only imagined. Cadets marched in perfect formation across parade grounds, while instructors observed from the sidelines with critical eyes. The buildings were a mixture of historic brick structures and modern glass edifices, creating an atmosphere that balanced tradition with innovation. "First time on base?" Private Johnson asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Yes," Sarah replied, still taking in the surroundings. "It's impressive." "Wait until you see the command center," Johnson said with obvious pride. "State-of-the-art technology mixed with enough history to make your head spin." They pulled up in front of an imposing building marked Base Operations Center. Armed guards flanked the entrance, and Sarah could see multiple security cameras tracking their arrival. As she stepped out of the vehicle, Sarah felt the weight of 20 years of questions and hopes resting on her shoulders. Whatever happened in the next few hours would either provide the answers she had been seeking or close the door on her father's mystery forever. The soldier escorted her through multiple security checkpoints, each more thorough than the last. Metal detectors, background verification, and biometric scans all confirmed her identity and authorization level. Finally, they arrived at a conference room door marked with the seal of the Department of Defense. "Colonel Martinez will be with you shortly," Private Johnson said, opening the door for her. "Can I get you anything while you wait? Coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be great," Sarah replied, her nerves making her mouth dry. The conference room was spartanly furnished with a long wooden table, leather chairs, and walls lined with portraits of distinguished military officers. Sarah recognized some of the faces from her father's stories, generals and admirals who had shaped military policy over the decades. As she waited, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that events were moving faster than she had anticipated. The morning's rejection at the gate now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by an almost overwhelming sense that she was finally on the verge of learning the truth about her father's fate. Little did she know that in a few short minutes, her entire understanding of her father's story, and her own place in it, would be completely transformed. The door to the conference room opened exactly 5 minutes after Sarah had settled into her chair with her steaming cup of coffee. She expected to see Colonel Martinez, but, instead, a woman in civilian clothes entered. She was tall and elegant, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a professional bun and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. "Miss Chen, I'm Director Patricia Hawkins from the Defense Intelligence Agency," the woman said, extending her hand. "I apologize for the deception, but security protocols required us to be somewhat vague about the nature of this meeting." Sarah shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and the way Director Hawkins' eyes never left her face. "I was expecting to meet with Colonel Martinez." "Colonel Martinez was the cover story we needed to get you here safely," Hawkins explained, taking a seat across from Sarah. "The truth is, your request to access your father's files triggered several automated security alerts that reached the highest levels of military intelligence." "I don't understand. I've been trying to get these files for 20 years. Why would my request suddenly cause alerts now?" Director Hawkins opened a thick manila folder and spread several documents across the table. Sarah could see her father's photograph clipped to one of the files, along with stamps marking various classification levels. "Because 3 weeks ago, new intelligence surfaced regarding Operation Sandstorm, the mission your father was investigating when he disappeared. Intelligence that not only confirms everything your father suspected but reveals that his investigation was far more successful than anyone realized." Sarah's heart began to race. "What do you mean, more successful? Your father didn't just uncover evidence of war crimes, Ms. Chen. He uncovered a massive conspiracy involving defense contractors, foreign governments, and high-ranking military officials. A conspiracy that is still active today." Hawkins slid a photograph across the table. It showed Sarah's father in desert camouflage, standing next to a man in expensive civilian clothes. The civilian's face had been partially obscured by black marker, but Sarah could make out enough features to see that he was middle-aged and well-dressed. This photograph was taken 3 days before your father's unit reported him missing, Hawkins continued. The man standing next to him is Marcus Webb, CEO of Titan Defense Solutions. At the time, Titan was the third largest private military contractor in the region. I've never heard of them. Most people haven't. Titan specialized in off-the-books operations, the kind of missions that governments needed to happen but couldn't officially acknowledge. Your father discovered that Titan was using these operations to smuggle weapons, sell intelligence to foreign buyers, and eliminate anyone who posed a threat to their business model. Sarah studied the photograph more closely. Her father looked serious but determined, the same expression he wore when he was working through a difficult problem. If my father uncovered all of this, why wasn't anything done about it? Because your father's commanding officer, General Richard Stone, was on Titan's payroll. When your father submitted his preliminary report, Stone buried it and ordered your father to cease his investigation immediately. But my father wouldn't have given up. No, he wouldn't have. Which is why 3 days later, Titan operatives staged an attack on your father's convoy. The official report blamed insurgents, but we now know it was an assassination disguised as enemy action. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had always suspected that her father's death wasn't as straightforward as the military claimed, but hearing it confirmed was devastating. You're telling me my father was murdered by his own people? By people who were supposed to be on his side, yes. But there's more. Hawkins pulled out another document, this one bearing multiple agency seals. Your father anticipated that something might happen to him. In his final days, he created what he called an insurance policy, a complete record of his investigation, including photographs, financial records, and recorded conversations with key players in the conspiracy. Where is this record now? That's where things get complicated. Your father hid the evidence in multiple locations, but he only told one person how to find it all, his daughter. Sarah felt the room spinning around her. Me? But I was only 12 years old when he died. He never told me anything about hidden evidence. Not directly, no. But he embedded clues in personal items, letters, and stories that only you would understand. He knew that if anything happened to him, you would eventually come looking for answers. Hawkins opened another file and pulled out a letter in Sarah's father's handwriting. The paper was yellowed with age, but the familiar script made Sarah's eyes fill with tears. This letter was found in a safety deposit box that your father rented under an assumed name. It's addressed to you, to be opened only if you ever gained access to his military files. With trembling hands, Sarah took the letter and began to read. My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, then my worst fears have come true, and the people I trusted with my life have betrayed that trust. I hope you can forgive me for the burden I am about to place on your shoulders, but you are the only person I know who has both the intelligence and the integrity to see this through. By now, you know that I discovered something terrible, a network of corruption that reaches into the highest levels of our government and military. I have documented everything, but I had to hide the evidence to protect it from the very people who are supposed to uphold justice. Do you remember the bedtime stories I used to tell you about the princess who had to collect 7 magical keys to save her kingdom? Each key was hidden in a place that only she would think to look, protected by riddles that only she could solve. My investigation is like those keys, Sarah. I have hidden 7 pieces of evidence in 7 different locations. Each piece is protected by something that connects to our family, to our shared memories and experiences. Only you will be able to understand the clues and retrieve all the evidence. Start with the place where we celebrated your 8th birthday, not the party location, but the quiet moment we shared afterward. Look for the item that made you laugh when it squeaked. I love you more than all the stars in the sky, and I believe in your strength and determination. Trust no one completely until you have all 7 pieces. The truth is bigger than I ever imagined, and it threatens people who will kill to keep their secrets. Your loving father, Colonel James Chin. Sarah read the letter 3 times before looking up at Director Hawkins.
You've had this letter for 20 years?
No, we only discovered it 2 weeks ago. The safety deposit box was rented under one of several false identities your father created during his investigation. It took our forensic accountants this long to trace all of his financial activities during those final months.
And you think I can actually find this hidden evidence? We're counting on it.
Because 3 days ago, Marcus Webb was found dead in his Swiss mansion.
Someone put 2 bullets in his head and ransacked his personal files.
We believe that whoever killed Webb is now looking for the same evidence your father hid.
The implication sent a chill down Sarah's spine. You think I'm in danger?
I think you're the only person who can find evidence that could bring down one of the most dangerous criminal conspiracies in modern military history.
And, yes, that puts you in considerable danger.
Hawkins closed the files and looked directly at Sarah. Which is why we're offering you protection and resources to complete your father's investigation.
But, I need you to understand what you're agreeing to.
The people involved in this conspiracy have unlimited resources and no conscience. They've already killed your father and Marcus Webb. They won't hesitate to kill you if they feel threatened. Sarah thought about her quiet life as a software engineer, her small apartment, her routine existence that had been comfortable but unfulfilling. Then, she thought about her father's promise to bring her back a souvenir, a promise that had never been kept because he had been murdered by people he trusted.
What kind of resources are you offering?
A full investigative team, including forensic analysts, surveillance experts, and protective detail. We'll also provide you with access to classified databases and intelligence networks that could help you decode your father's clues.
And, in return?
In return, you help us find the evidence your father died protecting, and we use it to bring his killers to justice.
Sarah looked at the letter again, focusing on the reference to her 8th birthday.
She remembered that day clearly, the family party at Chuck E. Cheese, followed by a quiet walk with her father to the nearby park. He had brought along a rubber duck that squeaked when squeezed, and they had fed the real ducks at the pond while the toy duck provided comedic sound effects. "The duck," she said quietly.
"Excuse me? My 8th birthday."
"He's talking about a rubber duck he brought to the park.
It squeaked when you squeezed it, and I thought it was hilarious."
Sarah felt excitement building despite her fear. "He hid something at that park."
Hawkins smiled for the first time during their conversation.
"That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes you indispensable to this investigation. Your father was brilliant, but he was also a loving father who understood how his daughter's mind worked."
"When do we start?"
"We can have a team at the park within 2 hours. But first, I need you to understand the rules of engagement. From this moment forward, you'll be under protective surveillance.
You won't be able to return to your normal life until this investigation is complete.
You'll be living in safe houses, traveling with security details, and following protocols designed to keep you alive." The reality of the situation began to sink in. Sarah had wanted answers about her father's death, but she hadn't expected those answers to completely upend her existence.
"What about my family? My brother David and my mother?"
"They'll be brought into protective custody as well. The conspiracy your father uncovered involves people who wouldn't hesitate to use your family as leverage against you." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Not only was she about to embark on a dangerous mission to complete her father's work, but she was also putting her family at risk in the process. "There's one more thing you should know," Hawkins said, her expression growing even more serious. "General Richard Stone, the man who betrayed your father, is still alive and still in a position of power. He's now the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and he has no idea that we know about his involvement in the conspiracy."
"He's still actively covering this up?"
"We believe so. Which means that every move we make in this investigation has to be carefully planned. Stone has access to intelligence networks and military resources that could compromise our mission if he becomes suspicious."
Sarah absorbed this information, feeling the complexity of the situation expanding with each revelation.
Her father hadn't just uncovered a historical conspiracy, he had exposed an ongoing criminal enterprise that was still operating at the highest levels of government.
Director Hawkins, can I ask you something?
Of course.
Why now? Why are you telling me all of this after 20 years of silence?
Hawkins was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Because Marcus Webb's murder changed everything. For 20 years, the conspiracy remained relatively stable. The key players kept their secrets, and the evidence stayed hidden.
But Webb's death created chaos within their organization.
People are scared, and scared people make mistakes.
What kind of mistakes?
They've started reaching out to old contacts, liquidating assets, and destroying records. All of that activity generates intelligence signatures that we can track. We've learned more about this conspiracy in the past 3 weeks than we learned in the previous 20 years.
Sarah understood the implication.
The killers were making themselves visible, which created opportunities for law enforcement but also increased the danger for anyone connected to the original investigation. So my father's evidence isn't just historically significant, it's immediately relevant to stopping an active criminal organization.
Exactly. And that evidence is the key to everything.
Without it, we have suspicions and circumstantial connections. With it, we have the foundation for prosecutions that could reach into the Pentagon itself. The magnitude of what she was being asked to do was overwhelming, but Sarah felt a clarity of purpose that she had never experienced before. Her father had died protecting information that could prevent others from suffering the same fate. Completing his mission wasn't just about finding closure, it was about preventing future tragedies.
I'll do it, she said firmly. I'll help you find my father's evidence. Hawkins nodded approvingly. I hoped you would say that. But, before we begin, there's someone I want you to meet.
The director picked up her phone and sent a brief text message. Within moments, the conference room door opened again, and 5 men in military dress uniforms entered. Sarah recognized the insignia indicating high-ranking generals, and she instinctively stood up as they approached. The lead general, a distinguished African-American man with graying hair and intense eyes, stepped forward and extended his hand.
Miss Chen, I'm General Michael Harrison, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Your father saved my life during our deployment to Afghanistan in 1999.
I owe him a debt that can never be repaid, but I intend to spend whatever resources necessary to ensure his killers face justice. Behind General Harrison stood 4 other generals, each representing different branches of the military. Sarah realized she was looking at some of the most powerful people in the American defense establishment. Your father was a hero in the truest sense of the word, General Harrison continued. He chose duty over personal safety, and he paid the ultimate price for that choice. But his sacrifice was not in vain, because you're here to finish what he started. Sarah felt tears threatening again, but she maintained her composure. General Harrison, I appreciate your support, but I have to ask, how do I know I can trust any of you? My father trusted his superiors, and they got him killed. The general's expression grew somber but understanding. That's a fair question, and it demonstrates the same careful thinking that made your father such an effective investigator.
You shouldn't trust us completely, not yet.
But you can verify our commitment by our actions over the coming days and weeks. Another general stepped forward, a woman with short blonde hair and piercing blue eyes.
Miss Chen, I'm General Patricia Wolf, Head of Military Intelligence.
I want you to know that every person in this room has been thoroughly vetted and cleared through multiple security protocols. We're not asking for blind trust, we're asking for the opportunity to prove ourselves worthy of the trust your father placed in us.
Sarah looked around the room at the assembled military leadership and felt the weight of history pressing down on her.
These people represented the highest levels of American military power, and they were all here because of her father's investigation.
What happens next? She asked.
General Harrison smiled grimly.
Next, we go find that rubber duck.
The convoy of black SUVs moved through the suburban streets with military precision, drawing curious stares from pedestrians who rarely saw such an obvious display of government presence. Sarah sat in the middle vehicle between Director Hawkins and General Harrison, watching familiar neighborhoods pass by the bulletproof windows. It felt surreal to be returning to the park of her childhood memories with such a high-profile escort.
Riverside Park looked smaller than Sarah remembered.
The playground equipment had been updated since her childhood, but the duck pond remained exactly as she recalled, a small oval of water surrounded by weeping willows and concrete benches. The rubber duck her father had brought that day had been bright yellow with an orange beak, and it had made the most ridiculous squeaking sound when compressed.
The maintenance shed, Sarah said suddenly, as their vehicles pulled into the parking area.
He used to joke that the park rangers stored their secret treasures in that old shed by the pond. General Harrison followed her gaze to a weathered wooden building tucked between two large oak trees. It had the same faded green paint and rusty padlock that Sarah remembered from 20 years ago. Agent Martinez, Director Hawkins called to a woman in dark clothing who emerged from one of the trailing vehicles.
"Get a locksmith kit and have the area secured.
I want a perimeter established, but keep it discreet.
We don't want to alarm the local residents."
Within minutes, the park was subtly surrounded by plainclothes agents who posed as joggers, dog walkers, and maintenance workers. Sarah watched the professional coordination with amazement, realizing that this level of resources was being deployed based entirely on her childhood memories and her father's cryptic letter. Agent Martinez made quick work of the old padlock, and the shed door creaked open to reveal shelves lined with gardening supplies, lawn maintenance equipment, and decades of accumulated debris. The musty smell of old wood and fertilizer filled the air as Sarah stepped inside with a flashlight.
"What exactly are we looking for?"
General Harrison asked, ducking his head to avoid a low-hanging shelf. "Something that squeaks," Sarah replied, methodically examining each shelf.
My father was very literal in his clues.
If he mentioned the rubber duck, then the hidden item probably makes a similar sound. She worked her way systematically through the shed, testing various items for any kind of sound. Garden hoses, spray bottles, and old toys left behind by previous visitors all remained silent under her touch.
After 20 minutes of searching, Sarah began to doubt her interpretation of the clue.
"Maybe I'm wrong about this location," she admitted, feeling frustrated.
"It's been 20 years. My memories might not be as accurate as I thought."
Director Hawkins stepped deeper into the shed, her experienced eyes scanning the space differently. "Your father was a trained operative, Sarah. He would have hidden something in a location that was both accessible and secure. Look for spaces that aren't obvious but aren't impossible to reach."
Sarah followed the director's advice, focusing on areas behind equipment and underneath shelves.
Her fingers explored crevices and gaps, searching for anything that felt out of place. Finally, while reaching behind an old lawn mower, her hand touched something soft and rubbery. "I found something," she called out, carefully extracting a plastic bag that had been taped to the back of the mower's engine compartment. Inside the bag was indeed a rubber duck, identical to the one from her 8th birthday, along with a waterproof envelope. Sarah squeezed the duck gently, and it responded with the same ridiculous squeak that had made her laugh as a child. Despite the serious circumstances, she couldn't help smiling at the sound. "Your father's sense of humor," General Harrison observed with obvious affection. "He always found ways to add personal touches to even the most serious situations." The envelope contained a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph showed a storage unit facility with the number 247 clearly visible on one of the doors.
The note read, "Where we kept your bicycle when we lived in the apartment.
The key is with Mrs. Patterson's emergency contacts. Second star to the right, and straight on until morning." Sarah's mind raced back to her family's living situation when she was young. "We lived in military housing when I was little, but there was a brief period when my father was between deployments and we rented a civilian apartment. It was too small for my bicycle, so he rented a storage unit."
"Do you remember where the apartment was?"
Director Hawkins asked. "Williamsburg Gardens, about 15 miles from here." It was a complex that catered to military families with short-term leases.
"And Mrs. Patterson?"
"Our neighbor. She was an elderly woman who looked after me sometimes when my parents had to be away. The second star to the right reference is from Peter Pan. She used to read it to me when I couldn't sleep." General Harrison was already coordinating with his security team through a secure radio. "Agent Rodriguez, I need you to run a background check on a Mrs. Patterson who lived at Williamsburg Gardens approximately 20 years ago. Also get me the contact information for the management company of that storage facility." As they prepared to leave the park, Sarah felt a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension. Finding the first clue had been easier than expected, but she knew that each subsequent piece of evidence would likely be hidden more carefully and protected by more complex puzzles. The drive to Williamsburg Gardens revealed that the apartment complex had undergone significant renovations since Sarah's childhood. The buildings had been repainted and landscaped, and many of the original residents had moved away. However, the property management office still maintained records from the previous decade.
Mrs.
Eleanor Patterson, Unit 3B, the property manager confirmed after checking her computer system. She passed away 8 years ago, but her nephew still lives in the area. He was listed as her emergency contact and inherited her personal effects. The nephew, Thomas Patterson, turned out to be a friendly man in his 50s who worked as a high school history teacher. When Sarah explained that she was looking for something that Mrs. Patterson might have kept for her family, he immediately offered to help. Aunt Eleanor was a pack rat, Thomas explained as he led them to his garage, which was filled with boxes of his aunt's belongings.
"She kept everything, and I mean everything.
I've been slowly going through her things for years, but there's still so much left." It took nearly an hour of searching through boxes labeled important documents and keepsakes before Sarah found what she was looking for, a small jewelry box with a note attached, "For Sarah Chen, when she's old enough to understand."
Inside the jewelry box was a storage unit key and another note from her father. "Remember the story about the knight who had to prove his worth?
Look for the place where strength meets wisdom.
The guardian will recognize the bloodline." Sarah stared at the note, trying to decode its meaning.
Her father had told her many stories about knights and quests, but she needed to remember which specific tale he was referencing. "He used to tell me about a knight who had to lift a sword from a stone," she said slowly. "But the sword could only be lifted by someone who possessed both physical strength and moral wisdom." General Harrison looked puzzled. "That sounds like the Arthurian legend of Excalibur." "Similar, but his version was different. In my father's story, the knight had to prove himself to a guardian, usually an old soldier or a wise woman who could see into people's hearts." Director Hawkins was studying the storage facility photograph more carefully. "This facility is called Guardian Self-Storage."
"That can't be a coincidence."
The storage facility was located in an industrial section of town that had seen better days. Guardian Self-Storage consisted of several long, windowless buildings surrounded by chain-link fencing and security cameras.
The office was manned by a single employee, an elderly veteran with multiple military tattoos covering his forearms. "Unit 247, the man confirmed after Sarah presented the key.
"That unit's been rented continuously for 22 years, always paid in advance. The original renter set up an automatic payment system through a bank draft."
"Do you remember anything about the person who rented it?" Sarah asked.
The man studied her face carefully, his eyes lingering on her features with obvious recognition. "You've got his eyes," he said finally. "Colonel Chan was a good man. He told me that someday his daughter would come looking for what he left behind."
Sarah felt her breath catch. "You knew my father?"
"Served under him in Panama, 1989.
He saved my unit when we were pinned down by enemy fire.
When he showed up here 20 years ago asking for a secure storage unit, I didn't ask questions." The man led them through the facility to Unit 247, which was located in the back corner of the complex, away from the main traffic flow. As he raised the metal door, Sarah gasped at what was revealed inside. The storage unit had been converted into a makeshift office and archive. Military-grade filing cabinets lined the walls, and a desk sat in the center with sophisticated communication equipment. Maps covered every available wall space, and strings connected various photographs and documents like a detective's investigation board. "This is incredible," Director Hawkins breathed.
"Your father created a complete intelligence operation right here."
General Harrison was examining the maps, which showed various locations throughout the Middle East marked with pins and annotations. These locations correspond to Titan Defense Solutions' known operational areas during the early 2000s. Sarah approached the desk and found another envelope marked with her name. This note was longer and more detailed than the previous ones. "Sarah, if you found this location, then you're beginning to understand the scope of what I uncovered. This storage unit contains copies of everything: financial records, photographs, recorded conversations, and witness statements. But the originals are still hidden in 5 other locations. The people involved in this conspiracy control banks, corporations, and government agencies. They have the resources to destroy any evidence that threatens them, which is why I had to be so careful about how I preserved what I learned. Your next destination requires you to remember our camping trip to Shenandoah National Park when you were 10 years old. Do you recall the story I told you about the Indian brave who hid his treasure in a place where water falls but never touches the ground? The treasure was protected by the spirits of his ancestors, but only his descendants could find it. Look for the waterfall that flows into mist. Behind the mist, you'll find a cave that doesn't appear on any official maps. Inside that cave is a metal box marked with our family name. But be careful, Sarah. By now, our enemies know that someone is following my trail. They will be watching for signs of activity at locations connected to my investigation. Trust the people you're with, but remember that even they cannot protect you if you're not careful." The third piece of evidence contains the financial records that prove how deep this conspiracy reaches. Politicians, military leaders, and business executives all received payments from Titan Defense Solutions in exchange for their cooperation. I love you, and I'm proud of the strong, intelligent woman I know you've become. Dad. Sarah looked around the storage unit with new appreciation for her father's methodical approach. He had created a comprehensive backup system for his investigation, but he had also made sure that no single location contained everything. Even if his enemies found some of the evidence, the complete picture would remain hidden. "Shenandoah National Park," she said to the assembled group. "There's a waterfall called Dark Hollow Falls that creates a mist at the bottom. My father took me there when I was 10, and he told me stories about hidden caves and ancient treasures." General Harrison was already coordinating with his team. "That's a 6-hour drive from here. We'll need to arrange secure transportation and coordinate with park rangers to ensure we don't attract unwanted attention." As they prepared to leave the storage unit, Director Hawkins pulled Sarah aside. "I need you to understand something. Your father's note mentions that our enemies are likely watching for activity related to his investigation. From this point forward, we have to assume that we're being tracked." "What does that mean?" "It means that finding the remaining evidence has become a race against time. The longer we take, the more likely it becomes that hostile forces will intercept us before we can complete our mission." Sarah felt a chill of fear, but it was mixed with determination. She was no longer just seeking answers about her father's death, she was actively working to prevent others from suffering the same fate. As their convoy pulled away from Guardian self-storage, Sarah noticed a dark sedan following them at a discreet distance. When she mentioned it to Director Hawkins, the woman's expression grew grim. "Agent Martinez," Hawkins spoke into her radio. "Confirm we have a tail. Dark blue sedan, license plate obscured. Implement Evasion Protocol 7. The convoy immediately changed course, taking a series of seemingly random turns through residential neighborhoods. The sedan attempted to follow but was eventually blocked by other vehicles that appeared to be part of their security detail. "Professional surveillance," General Harrison observed. "Someone with significant resources is tracking our movements." Sarah realized that her father's warnings were already proving accurate. The conspiracy he had uncovered was still active, still dangerous, and now fully aware that his investigation was being continued. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Unknown," Director Hawkins replied. "But we need to assume that every move we make from now on is being watched by people who will kill to protect their secrets." The race to complete Colonel Chen's investigation had officially begun, and Sarah was no longer just hunting for hidden evidence, she was being hunted in return. The helicopter's rotors cut through the morning mist as it approached Shenandoah National Park, carrying Sarah and her protective detail toward what she hoped would be answers that had eluded her family for 2 decades. General Harrison had decided that ground transportation was too risky after the surveillance incident, so they were approaching Dark Hollow Falls from the air.
Landing zone is clear, the pilot announced through the headset. No signs of hostile activity in the immediate area. Sarah looked down at the familiar landscape of her childhood camping trip. The waterfall was exactly as she remembered, a ribbon of white water cascading down weathered rocks before disappearing into a cloud of perpetual mist. Even from the helicopter, she could see the hidden pathway her father had shown her, a narrow trail that led behind the falling water. The landing zone was a small clearing about half a mile from the waterfall. As soon as they touched down, security teams fanned out to establish a perimeter while Sarah oriented herself to the terrain. "The cave entrance is behind the waterfall," she explained to Director Hawkins. "My father told me it was carved by ancient peoples, but park rangers don't include it in official maps because it's considered too dangerous for casual hikers." The hike to the waterfall took 20 minutes through dense forest that provided natural cover from aerial surveillance. Sarah found herself remembering her father's voice as he had explained the geological forces that created such hidden spaces, his patient teaching style that made even complex subjects understandable to a 10-year-old girl. At the waterfall's base, the sound of cascading water made normal conversation impossible. Sarah signaled to her companions and began working her way along the slippery rocks that led behind the falling curtain of water. The mist soaked through her clothes within moments, and the temperature dropped noticeably in the shadow of the cliff face. Behind the waterfall, exactly where she remembered, was a narrow opening in the rock face. It was barely wide enough for one person to enter at a time, and it would have been completely invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. Sarah switched on her flashlight and squeezed through the opening, followed by Director Hawkins and Agent Martinez. The cave extended back into the cliff for about 30 feet before opening into a larger chamber. Her father had been right about the ancient origins. Primitive drawings covered portions of the walls, and the floor showed signs of human habitation from centuries past. In the back corner of the chamber, partially concealed by fallen rocks, was a waterproof container marked Chen in her father's distinctive handwriting. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the container and found another collection of documents, photographs, and a digital storage device. The accompanying letter was brief but ominous. "Sarah, the evidence in this container proves that Titan Defense Solutions was operating as a front for foreign intelligence agencies. They weren't just profiteering from illegal weapons sales, they were actively selling American military secrets to hostile nations. General Stone wasn't just covering up war crimes. He was committing treason on a scale that could have compromised national security for generations. The financial records in this container show payments from Chinese and Russian sources totaling over $50 million. The photographs document meetings between American military officials and foreign operatives. The digital files contain recorded conversations that prove the conspiracy reaches into the highest levels of government. But, Sarah, I need you to be extremely careful with this information. The people involved have killed before, and they will kill again to protect themselves. The final 4 pieces of evidence are hidden in locations that will require you to trust your instincts and remember our most private family moments. Your next destination is the place where you learn that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Look for the memorial that honors ordinary people who did extraordinary things. The guardian there will remember a promise made to a little girl who wanted to understand courage. I'm running out of time to write these letters, sweetheart. Forces are closing in, and I may not have the opportunity to hide much more evidence. If something happens to me, know that everything I did was to protect the country I swore to serve and the family I love more than life itself." Dad. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she finished reading. Her father's final letters had a desperate urgency that spoke to the danger he had known was coming for him. "The memorial," she said, wiping her eyes. "He's talking about the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall. When I was 9, he took me there and explained that heroism wasn't about uniforms or ranks, it was about ordinary people who chose to do what was right even when it cost them everything." Director Hawkins examined the digital storage device, noting the military-grade encryption that protected its contents. "We'll need specialized equipment to access these files, but if they contain what your father claims, this could be enough to trigger the largest military investigation in decades."
They made their way back through the cave and, behind the waterfall, emerging into daylight that seemed blindingly bright after the darkness of the hidden chamber. As they began their hike back to the helicopter landing zone, Agent Martinez suddenly raised her hand in a signal for silence. Movement in the tree line, she whispered into her radio.
Multiple contacts approaching from the northeast. General Harrison's voice crackled through their earpieces. Hostile forces confirmed. We've got armed personnel moving to intercept your position. Recommend immediate extraction via alternate route.
Sarah felt her heart racing as the reality of their situation became clear. Someone had tracked them to Shenandoah despite their precautions, and that someone was willing to use force to stop her from continuing her father's investigation. This way, Agent Martinez directed, leading them away from the main trail toward a more challenging route that would be harder for pursuers to follow. The terrain was rough and steep, requiring them to use both hands to navigate fallen logs and rocky outcroppings. Behind them, Sarah could hear the sound of men moving through the forest with military precision. Their pursuers were experienced and well-equipped, but they were operating on unfamiliar ground while Sarah's security detail had the advantage of superior training and motivation. The alternate extraction point was a small meadow about a mile from their original landing zone. As they reached the clearing, Sarah could hear the approaching sound of helicopter rotors, but she couldn't tell if it was their ride or additional hostile forces. Friendly bird inbound, General Harrison's voice announced through their earpieces. 30 seconds to touchdown. The helicopter that emerged from the morning mist bore military markings and was flanked by 2 attack helicopters that took up defensive positions around the clearing. Sarah had never been so happy to see American military aircraft in her life. As they lifted off, she could see armed figures emerging from the forest where they had just been hiking. The pursuit had been closer than anyone had wanted to admit. Who were they? Sarah asked Director Hawkins once they were safely airborne. Professional operators with significant resources, Hawkins replied grimly. The kind of people who have the equipment and training to track government security details through national parks. General Harrison's voice came through the headset from his position in the lead helicopter. Ms. Chen, we need to discuss changing our operational approach. The level of opposition we're encountering suggests that our enemies have access to real-time intelligence about our movements. What does that mean? It means someone inside the government or military establishment is providing information to the people who killed your father. We may be dealing with active treason at the highest levels. The helicopter flight to Washington, D.C. gave Sarah time to process the magnitude of what her father had uncovered. It wasn't just a historical conspiracy, it was an ongoing threat to national security that had been operating for over 20 years. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall was crowded with visitors when they arrived, making it an ideal location for a discreet meeting. Sarah walked slowly along the black granite panels, searching for the specific section where her father had taught her about courage and sacrifice. She found what she was looking for near panel 10E, an elderly woman in a park ranger uniform who was helping visitors locate names on the memorial. When the woman looked up and saw Sarah, her face immediately showed recognition. "You're James Chen's daughter," the woman said softly. "He said you would come here someday, and that you would be looking for something he left in my care." The park ranger, whose name tag read Dorothy Walsh, had worked at the memorial for over 30 years. She led Sarah to a small office building adjacent to the memorial site, where she retrieved a sealed envelope from a locked filing cabinet. "Your father brought this to me 3 days before he was deployed for the last time," Dorothy explained. "He said it was important family documents that he wanted kept safe, and he made me promise to give them only to you." The envelope contained a key and an address for a safety deposit box in downtown Washington. The accompanying note read, "Sarah, inside this safety deposit box are the final 3 pieces of evidence that complete the picture of what I discovered. The first contains the master list of all American officials who received payments from foreign sources. The second documents the specific military secrets that were sold to hostile nations. The third is my complete personal testimony, recorded in my own voice, explaining everything I learned and how I learned it. But, Sarah, I want you to understand something crucial. This evidence is so explosive that releasing it improperly could damage American national security. The people involved in this conspiracy are criminals and traitors, but some of the information they sold could still be used against our country if it fell into the wrong hands. You must work with people you trust completely to ensure this evidence is used to prosecute the guilty while protecting ongoing national security operations. General Michael Harrison is someone I trust with my life. If he's still alive when you read this, he can help you navigate these complexities.
I know I'm asking too much of you, sweetheart. A father should protect his daughter from such burdens, not pass them along.
But, you're the only person I trust to see this through properly. The safety deposit box also contains something personal, letters I wrote to you and your mother during my final weeks, explaining everything I couldn't say while I was alive. Reading them may be painful, but they will help you understand why I made the choices I did.
I love you beyond measure, and I'm proud of the amazing woman you've become. Dad, the safety deposit box was located in a bank 3 blocks from the memorial.
Sarah, Director Hawkins, and General Harrison were escorted by a full security detail that had been expanded to include FBI agents and military police. The stakes had risen to the point where they were treating the evidence recovery as a matter of national security. Inside the safety deposit box were 3 large folders, each marked with a different classification level, and a smaller box containing personal letters. Sarah opened one of her father's personal letters and began reading, "My dearest Sarah and Linda, if you're reading this, then I'm gone but not forgotten. I want you to know that every decision I made was motivated by love for my family and love for my country. I discovered that people I trusted were selling American secrets to foreign enemies. I couldn't let that continue, even though I knew that exposing them would cost me everything.
Some things are more important than personal safety. Sarah, you have always been my greatest source of pride.
Your intelligence, your integrity, and your determination remind me every day why America is worth defending. I know that completing this investigation will be difficult and dangerous, but I also know that you're strong enough to handle whatever comes. The evidence I've gathered will allow prosecutors to bring charges against dozens of people who betrayed their oaths and their country. Some of them are people we trusted, people we served with, people who should have been protecting the very secrets they sold. But, Sarah, remember that justice and revenge are not the same thing. Use this evidence to ensure that the guilty are punished and that such betrayals cannot happen again. Don't let anger or hatred guide your decisions. I wish I could have been there to see you graduate from college, to walk you down the aisle someday, to meet my grandchildren. But I take comfort in knowing that you'll use the strength I tried to give you to make the world a better place. Your loving father, Colonel James Chen. As Sarah finished reading, she noticed that the bank had grown unusually quiet. Director Hawkins was speaking urgently into her phone, while General Harrison was coordinating with their security detail through hand signals.
"We need to leave immediately," Hawkins announced. "Hostile forces are converging on this location from multiple directions."
They gathered the evidence quickly and moved toward the bank's rear exit, where armored vehicles were waiting to extract them. As they emerged into the alley behind the building, Sarah could hear the distant sound of sirens and helicopters. "How did they find us so quickly?" she asked. "The same way they've been tracking us all along," General Harrison replied grimly.
"Someone with access to our operational plans is feeding information to our enemies."
The convoy moved through Washington, D.C. with emergency escort vehicles clearing traffic ahead of them. Sarah clutched her father's evidence folders, realizing that she was now in possession of information that could bring down government officials at the highest levels. Their destination was a secure facility at Fort McNair, where the evidence could be properly analyzed and protected. As they passed through the military checkpoint, Sarah felt a sense of relief that they had finally reached safe ground. In a secure conference room at Fort McNair, Sarah watched as teams of analysts and prosecutors began examining her father's evidence. The documents painted a picture of corruption and treason that exceeded even the worst suspicions of the investigating team.
"This is extraordinary," the lead prosecutor announced after reviewing the financial records.
"We have documented proof of payments from foreign intelligence services to over 40 American officials, including senators, defense contractors, and military officers." General Harrison studied the list of names with obvious shock. Some of these people are still in positions of power. General Stone is just the beginning. This conspiracy reaches into the Pentagon, the CIA, and the State Department.
Director Hawkins was examining the recorded testimony that Colonel Chen had created during his final weeks. Your father documented everything methodically, Sarah. He knew that his accusations would be challenged, so he created an evidentiary record that will be virtually impossible to refute. As the day wore on, the scope of the investigation expanded dramatically. FBI agents were dispatched to arrest suspects, while intelligence analysts worked to assess the national security damage caused by 20 years of ongoing espionage. Sarah sat in the conference room, watching justice finally begin to unfold, and felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Her father had been vindicated, but the cost of that vindication was a revelation of betrayal that reached to the highest levels of American government. Late that evening, General Harrison approached Sarah with a solemn expression. Miss Chen, I wanted to inform you personally that General Richard Stone was arrested 2 hours ago at his home in Virginia. He's being charged with treason, conspiracy, and the murder of your father. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of relief rather than grief. After 20 years of uncertainty and bureaucratic stonewalling, she finally had confirmation that her father's killers would face justice. What happens now? She asked. Now we use your father's evidence to dismantle one of the most dangerous spy networks in American history, General Harrison replied. And we make sure that his sacrifice wasn't in vain. Over the following months, Sarah watched as her father's investigation led to the largest espionage prosecutions in decades. Dozens of officials were arrested and charged with various crimes ranging from treason to conspiracy to murder. The Titan Defense Solutions network was completely dismantled, and new security protocols were implemented to prevent similar breaches. Sarah returned to her quiet life as a software engineer, but she remained in contact with the investigators who continued to follow leads from her father's evidence. She had finally found the answer she had been seeking for 20 years, but, more importantly, she had completed the mission her father had died trying to finish. The last letter from her father had contained a simple message: justice delayed is not justice denied. Sarah had learned that some truths are worth dying for, and some promises are worth keeping no matter how long it takes. Colonel James Chen had kept his promise to bring back a souvenir from his final deployment, not a trinket or a gift, but justice for the betrayals that had cost him his life. It had taken 20 years and the courage of his daughter to deliver that souvenir home, but it had finally arrived.